Good morning, Central Kentucky. This is Sandra Leslie White coming to you live from WJMM Studios here in Central Kentucky. Shouting out to those of you around the country, WJMM.com and Facebook Live. Good morning, and I am going to talk to you today about being enslaved. Okay, so yesterday we talked about the slave trade as it relates to this exchange that's about to go on between Hosea, who is going to buy back his wife as a master would buy back a slave. And so, wondering today is, what are you enslaved to? I know that around the world, we talk about slavery today. There's some 27 million people on the planet in some form of slavery. And remember, I talked about that quote coming from American Anti-Slavery Group. So we're looking at slavery. We understand slavery from a historical perspective. We understand slavery as, usually hard labor, and that's, coming all the way from, Genesis, actually, and the curse, certainly through Exodus and on through to Hosea and beyond, in the whole idea of slaves and masters. Jesus talks about slaves and masters in his parables as well. So we are going through time, it seems, with this horrific concept and reality of slavery. The capturing, selling, buying of slaves. That is the slave trade. But what about being enslaved today in America? And I know that those of you who are involved in the sex trafficking ministries out there to assist women, men, little girls, and boys in the sex trafficking business is big business in America today, and especially in our larger cities and where our stadiums are, etc., for professional football games and large events and things of that nature, professional sports at all. So that absolutely blows my mind to think that is such an issue for us today. And it's still somewhat covert. I mean, it's not as overt as the slave trade has been over time, where slaves were literally in downtown Lexington, led up onto the steps of what was the courthouse and sold not too many centuries ago. So what do we see, though, that is our hidden slavery? And I want to talk about that because I think in some respects, this chapter 3 of Hosea that we're in today, and we're going to go 3, 1, and 2 again, talks about slavery, yes, in the physical, but really talking about slavery in the spiritual. So let's jump into Hosea 3, 1, and 2 again today. This is the Lord speaking to Hosea about his wayward wife, Gomer. In the New American Standard Version this morning, Hosea 3, 1. Then the Lord said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by her husband, yet an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the sons of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love raisin cakes. So I bought her for myself for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a half of barley. Okay, so this is, as we discussed yesterday, and if you would like to look at that show and weren't able to listen in yesterday, you can go to my Facebook page, Sandra Leslie White Ministries Facebook page, and all of my shows are archived there. We looked at this interesting transaction. So we know that even after Yahweh pursued Gomer, we talk about her being a runaway bride at this point. Not only did he pursue her, forgive her, romance her, restore her, renew her, prepare her to be planted in the land so that people would know his compassion and people would know that they are somebody. That's my summary of chapter 2. But we look at chapter 3, and then apparently she's gone again. So she's off again on her escapades in her field of temple prostitution. Or we can look at this adulterous wife who runs after her lovers as also being a spiritual adulteress. So this is a very clear dynamic in Hosea, and sometimes it lands on whether you see Hosea as, or the scriptures, frankly, as literal in their content and in their context historically. And I do see this as a literal translation. I usually go through that way with my scriptures, looking at the deeper meaning of the word as it is written. And I see Hosea a little more like Augustine would see Hosea, in more of a literal sense of this was actually a prophet who was actually married to a temple prostitute. And this gave us this picture not only of a wayward wife, but a wayward people of God. So we know the prophecies written to the northern tribes of, the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom, when the kingdom split in Israel in the latter part of the 8th century BC. We know this, but I think it's important for us to understand in this message today, which I'm titling, asking the question in a title, what are you enslaved to? That it can be in the spiritual realm. It can be something so hidden in you and in me that we're not even realizing we're enslaved by it. So looking at this action in Hosea 3:1-2, the Lord says to Hosea, go after her. Don't just let her go on and go back to her destructive ways, Hosea. I know you might be tired of this and tired of her, and why don't, probably complaining to the Lord, what, give me another wife, do something. But he says, go again, love a woman who's loved by you. Apparently Hosea loves Gomer, but she's an adulteress. And so even as the Lord loves the sons of Israel, though they turn to other gods. So the idea here is clear. Loving her, going after her again, the powerful love of God. I mean, it is consistent throughout the book of Hosea. This contrast of going after her and she runs away and coming back and going after her. So anyway, this sort of is a common theme throughout the book. However, there are many, many truths in the remainder of the book of Hosea. It is not that simplistic, which is why I feel like the Lord is leading me to continue teaching the book of Hosea till the end of the book. So let's look at this buying her. So he goes, apparently, he goes and buys her back. So I guess going back into prostitution means that you're owned by someone else, the owner of the temple, the prostitution ring. Today's terminology might be the pimp. He goes and he buys her back. Verse 2, so I bought her for myself, not for everybody else. She's not going to be for everybody else. He's going to go back and buy her back for himself for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a half of barley. So essentially, I said yesterday that is half the price of a slave. The 30 shekels of silver comes to us out of Exodus, that background for the price of a slave. But he also offers up this homer and a half of barley, which was perhaps more common in that day because of the need for the agricultural business, and also it was part of the trade with an individual that perhaps wasn't wealthy enough to have 30 shekels of silver. So we've got a prophet with 15 shekels of silver, but he's got his barley. So he comes from his field and he comes from his finances. And so it seems to represent all of creation here, but it does make it clear that there is to be a transaction here from this slave trader, from the one who owns the prostitution ring, from the pimp, whoever you want to call him. There's a transaction between Hosea, the owner, who has now brought Gomer back into bondage, into the sex trade, essentially. So, all right, so this happens. Now, when we talk about our own enslavement, when we talk about the fact, and we can see the parallel here, that Jesus, he pays it all. He purchases us with his blood. It's a clear, in my opinion, it is a clear prophetic message about how God continuously pursues us. And for those of us who may not know the Old and New Testament and understand how it kind of fits together, I can be simplistic in this, but it seems like throughout the Old Testament, God is continually pursuing his people. His people sort of get it and go along with him for a while, then they go on and they serve other gods. They run away. The runaway bride. And it seems that he's just had enough in Malachi, the end of the Old Testament. He just had enough. There's 400 years of silence. I think something was going on. And then Jesus comes onto the scene, as we see in Matthew. And so it seems to me that when he sends his only begotten Son, it is because he understands that the people don't understand him. So he sends his Son in his image on the earth in the power of his Spirit to manifest himself to us, to you and to me. But I think the primary goal, and I love this out of 1 John 3:8, the primary goal of Jesus coming was to destroy the works of the devil in your life and in mine, to take us out of what enslaves us. And for Americans, I don't know, if you're not involved in the sex trade industry, and maybe there's some of you out there, I hope you're listening in. It is without question that Yahweh, God, is after you. He's after me. He's after whatever enslaves us, whether it's overtly something that is clearly against the purposes of God, like the sex, trade, or the slave trade, or anything like that is in physical bondage to another human being. That's so obvious. But what is enslaving us within us that may not be really so covert, so overt, I should say? What is covert in our lives? What is hidden in our lives that is enslaving us? Well, I think that we've talked about these things together. We've talked about, we've talked about alcoholism. We've talked about food addiction. We've talked about sex addiction. We've talked about pornography. We've talked about these things. We've talked about the things that enslave us that maybe we can keep private and to ourselves. But this is what Jesus and his blood purchased. It's his blood that purchased you back from whatever keeps you in the dark, whatever worries you, whatever really makes you anxious, whatever is chronic in your life that you want to be free from. That is what Jesus purchased to buy you back with his blood. Hosea purchased Gomer back from prostitution, from adulterous ways, from spiritual adultery, from serving other gods, to by the price of a slave. So Jesus, by the price of his blood, the most powerful thing that runs through our blood veins too as believers, he bought you and me back out of whatever binds you into destructive ways, into loneliness, into depression, into grief, into obsessive behavior, into just completely giving up on yourself. Well, sometimes completely giving up on yourself is when God can truly come after you and purchase you, but make it clear that his blood purchases you out of whatever you've given up on. So I just want to encourage you, brothers and sisters. We are an enslaved people in many ways in this country. We're being influenced by false gods. Recognize them for what they are and allow the blood of Jesus to purchase you back from them for his purposes. God bless you today.